Claudia Renner was mid-sentence when the elevator doors opened. She stopped, not because the doors interrupted her, but because of the man who stepped through them. The ballroom on the 23rd floor of the Pacific Grand had been arranged with the care that comes from a $3,000 per plate gala, round tables in ivory linen, low centerpieces of cream roses, the Vancouver harbor glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows below. 14 investors, 7 executive partners from firms whose names appeared on downtown buildings. Spencer Galt had called it the room where things actually get decided, which was something Spencer said often enough that Claudia had stopped responding to it. She had not expected the man standing in the doorway. This channel exists because we believe every story of quiet strength deserves to be told clearly. If you're new here, stay with us. This one is worth hearing all the way through. Elias Nwosu arrived at the Pacific Grand every morning at 6:30. He parked 2 blocks away, walked through the service entrance on Howe Street, and had his jacket buttoned before he reached the lobby. He was never late, not once in the 22 months he had worked there. The morning manager had noted Elias's punctuality in the first week, and then filed it the way you file a fact that isn't useful enough to keep at the front of your mind. Elias was 38 years old. He carried luggage, managed valet requests, coordinated airport transfers, and kept track of long-term guests' preferences with an accuracy that the concierge desk occasionally borrowed without acknowledgement. He was good at the job in the specific way that comes from deciding the work in front of you is worth doing correctly, regardless of who is watching. What the hotel did not know, what Claudia Renner did not know, what Spencer Galt had never once considered, was that 5 years earlier Elias had been a senior operations analyst at Barrett & Inn Partners, one of the more respected mid-size logistics consultancies in the Lower Mainland. He had modeled supply chain efficiencies for resource extraction companies, built cost frameworks for West Coast port corridors, and presented quarterly findings to boards of directors in conference rooms, not entirely different from the one Westline Partners was using tonight. He had been on track for a principal role when his father had the first stroke. Augustine Nwosu was 66 at the time, a retired machinist, a man who had come to Vancouver from Lagos in 1984 and spent 31 years building a life that fit him quietly and well. The second stroke came 8 weeks after the first. The care facility Augustine needed ran to numbers that did not resolve against a consultant's salary, especially once the unpredictable schedule of medical appointments was factored in. Barrett & Ing offered 2 weeks of compassionate leave and a card signed by the team. Elias did the arithmetic at his father's bedside on a Tuesday afternoon, handed in his notice by Friday, and had a new job by the following week. The porter role paid a living wage, covered the bills without surplus, and offered enough scheduling flexibility to manage his father's appointments without asking anyone's permission. He did not consider it a failure. It was a calculation. The distinction mattered to him even when it mattered to no one around him. He had tried early on to mention his background, once to a hotel guest who asked, with genuine seeming interest, what he'd done before, once to a colleague during a quiet afternoon in the lobby. Both times the response was the look that lands just before the subject changes. Not hostile, not cruel, just the mild, reflexive disbelief of someone who has already filed you and does not have a folder for what you've just said. He stopped mentioning it. He listened instead. In 22 months at the Pacific Grand, he had heard things. Westline Partners kept a standing arrangement for client meetings in the hotel's private boardroom on the 2nd floor. Claudia Renner stayed in the executive suite when she was in from Victoria. Spencer Galt used the hotel bar for conversations that did not appear on official calendars. Elias carried their luggage, managed their car requests, and stood in corridors with trolleys, while deals were discussed on the other side of doors left open, because nobody thought about the man reorganizing bags outside. He was functionally invisible. He had made a kind of peace with it. But it was the kind of peace that costs something to maintain every single day. The invitation happened on a Thursday. Spencer had been waiting in the lobby for his car when he watched Elias maneuver a heavy luggage cart around a family of 4 with the particular efficiency of someone who has mapped the lobby's traffic patterns in his sleep. Spencer watched the way a man watches something that doesn't interest him, but is briefly in his line of sight. "You know what would be genuinely entertaining?" Spencer said to Claudia, who had just come down from her suite, with her phone pressed to her ear. She held up a finger. Spencer waited. When she lowered the phone, he said, "Bring the porter to the Gala Saturday. Let him loose in a room full of people who actually make decisions. See what happens." Claudia looked at Spencer, then at Elias, who was at the far end of the lobby with his back turned. "That's not something I'm going to do," she said. "Why not? It's generous, really. He'll get a meal out of it. It's not as though he's going to start discussing infrastructure finance with the Kimball Group." Spencer was already smiling at the version of Saturday that existed only in his imagination, the confusion at the menu, the careful, painfully transparent attempt to belong. Claudia picked up her bag. "It's a professional gala, Spencer." But Spencer was not finished. Over the following 20 minutes, as Elias drove them toward Claudia's dinner meeting in the hotel's house car, one of the arrangements he sometimes covered when the valet team was short-staffed, Spencer continued building the case from the passenger seat. The inclusive gesture, the staff member who would appreciate the experience. Nobody needed to make it a thing. Elias kept his eyes on the road. He heard every word. By the time they reached the restaurant on West Georgia, Claudia had not agreed, but she had stopped saying no with the same certainty. That evening, she told Elias to pull over on the return trip. She leaned forward slightly from the back seat. "Saturday," she said, "the gala. You should come as a guest." Elias looked at the road. He checked his mirror. He merged into the right lane before he answered. "Is that a real invitation?" he said. "Or is this something else?" There was a pause. In the pause, Elias heard the answer she was not going to give him directly. "Just dress nicely," she said. He pulled to the curb outside the hotel and waited while she walked through the main doors. Then he drove the house car to the underground level, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the specific quiet of an underground parking garage when no one is watching. He understood exactly what Saturday was supposed to be. He had heard Spencer's voice from the front seat. He knew the version of events in which he arrived in his best off-the-rack jacket and spent 3 hours navigating glassware, while people like Spencer Galt confirmed something to each other about the natural order of rooms. He could decline. He had every reasonable justification to decline. But Elias had spent 22 months keeping himself small so that everyone around him could feel undisturbed, and on the drive back through downtown Vancouver, somewhere on the Granville Bridge with the False Creek lit below and the city doing its indifferent nighttime work, he made a decision. He was not going to refuse. He was going to accept on his own terms. He went home that night and checked on his father. Augustine was in the living room with the late news on a cup of tea on the side table, his left hand resting on his knee the way it rested now, a little heavier than before. "Something happen?" his father asked. "I've been invited somewhere Saturday." Augustine looked at him for a moment. "You going?" "Yes," Elias said. His father nodded and looked back at the television. That was the whole conversation. It was also everything that needed to be said. Elias went to his bedroom and opened the closet. He moved 3 boxes from the upper shelf until he found what he was looking for. A charcoal suit in a dry cleaning bag, Italian wool, bought in 2019 for a board of directors presentation at Barrett & Ing's biggest client that year. He unzipped the bag and held the jacket against the light. No damage, the kind of suit that lasts when you've been careful with it. He laid it on the bed. He found his father's watch in the top drawer of the nightstand. A Seiko automatic stainless steel given to Elias the day he accepted his first professional job offer at 24. Simple, not expensive, completely irreplaceable. He wound it and set it on the dresser. Friday, he drove Augustine to a physiotherapy appointment and waited in the lobby, reading a public consultation document on tolling revenue projections under the new BC Transportation Act amendments. He had downloaded it 3 weeks earlier and had been reading it in pieces the way he read most things now, in waiting rooms, in parking structures in the quiet minutes between tasks. Saturday afternoon, he got his hair cut. Saturday evening, he dressed with the deliberateness of someone who knows what they're doing and why, and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. He was not a different person. He had not recovered a title or uncovered a secret. He was the same man who had carried luggage through the lobby of the Pacific Grand for 22 months. What he was choosing tonight was to stop performing as less than he was, for the comfort of people who had never asked whether there might be more. He drove himself to the hotel. He took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The hostess found his name on the list. Claudia had added it without comment and led him through the doors. The room went quiet. Not the polite, gradual quiet of a conversation winding down, the sudden collective silence of a room interrupted by something it did not prepare for. Elias moved through the space without hurrying and without apology. He greeted the two guests nearest the door with a handshake and direct eye contact, found his seat, and looked at the menu with the quiet attention of someone who has sat at tables like this before and knows what they want. Across the table, Spencer Golt looked at him for a long moment. Then Spencer picked up his wine glass and began revising his evening. Spencer made his first move before the appetizers arrived. He did it the way he did most things, folded into conversation so smoothly that the motive inside it was nearly invisible. He turned to Elias and asked with the warm curiosity of a man genuinely seeking input, whether Elias had any thoughts on the Pinot Noir, a specific Okanagan Valley producer, a less distributed vintage. The kind of question designed less to learn something and more to establish where a person stands in relation to the room. Elias looked at the bottle, which he had already noted when the sommelier presented it. He named the winery, described the valley microclimate that shaped that particular vintage's profile, and said it would hold better against the duck than the salmon, which happened to be what he had ordered. A small silence moved around the table. Spencer's expression remained pleasant, in the careful way that pleasant expressions are maintained when the situation beneath them has shifted. He tried again during the main course. The conversation had moved naturally toward infrastructure markets, and Spencer steered it toward Elias with practiced ease. What did he make of the current challenges in BC highway corridor development? Just curious, making conversation. Elias answered. He spoke for 90 seconds without hedging about the gap between projected and actual tolling revenues in recent provincial corridor expansions and the downstream effect on private partnership models. One of the Kimball Group's representatives turned to look at him more directly. Another leaned in slightly. Spencer waited until the second course was nearly cleared. By then, the conversation had found its natural center. Westline's upcoming $480 million infrastructure deal, a public-private partnership to develop and operate a major highway corridor across the BC and Alberta border. Spencer had been the primary architect and spoke about it with the authority of someone who wanted the room to understand that clearly. He laid out the structure, the terms, the anticipated returns over the 15-year operating window. Then he looked at Elias. Of course, Spencer said, this sort of thing takes years in the industry to really appreciate the texture of, no disrespect intended. The no disrespect, the small disclaimer that reveals the speaker knows exactly what they are doing. Elias set down his fork. He had heard this deal discussed from the front seat of the house car for 11 weeks. He had heard Claudia reviewing term sheets on the phone during the drive, from the hotel to her client meetings. He had heard Spencer argue with the CFO over the revenue projection methodology in the second-floor boardroom, where the door had been left open because nobody thought about the man with the luggage trolley in the corridor outside. He had also spent 3 weeks reading a public document that the people arguing about that methodology apparently had not. The tolling revenue projections in the current model, Elias said, are still using the pre-amendment figures. The BC Transportation Act changes that came into effect in March shifted the revenue ceiling on Class 2 corridors. If the deal closes in its current structure, the first operating cycle will come in significantly below projection. He paused, roughly 19 million below, based on the current regulatory framework. The table went quiet, not the courteous quiet of a room making space for a newcomer. A different quality of silence entirely, the silence of people rapidly reassessing something they had considered settled. Loretta Kimball, 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of composed that comes from 4 decades of not being easily surprised, looked at Elias directly. "What's your background?" she asked. Spencer answered before Elias could. "He handles luggage for the hotel," Spencer said. His voice was even, but something at the edges of it had tightened. "He's Claudia's guest for the evening." Elias looked at Spencer. He held the look without filling the silence with anything conciliatory. "That's right," Elias said, "and sometimes the person handling the luggage outside the boardroom is close enough to hear the things being said inside it." Loretta Kimball looked from Elias to Spencer and then back to Elias. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but occupying the same territory, and lifted her wine glass. Spencer did not speak again for some time. Claudia found Elias on the terrace after dessert. The rest of the table had moved toward the windows for post-dinner conversation, and the sound of the room came through the glass doors as a low, pleasant murmur. Elias was standing at the railing with his jacket still buttoned, looking out over the harbor. The lights of North Vancouver moved in broken lines across the dark water below. She came to stand beside him. She did not begin with an apology. He noted the absence and found he appreciated it. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "About your background, about what you'd done before." Elias was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember the call you took in the car 3 months ago?" he said. "The Pemberton Group. You told them you were prepared to walk away from the term sheet." Claudia said nothing. "You weren't," Elias said. "You needed that deal to close before year-end. You said it anyway, and they believed you, and they moved. I was 2 feet away. You never once considered whether I understood what was happening. Not because you were hiding something from me. Because the person in the driver's seat wasn't really a person in that calculation. He was part of the car." Claudia felt the weight of that land, somewhere specific and uncomfortable. "I know why you invited me," Elias said, not unkindly, "and I think you know that I know. Spencer thought it would be funny. You were curious about what would happen. Neither of those things is the same as wanting me in the room." He turned to look at her. "There's a difference between being invited to a table and being seen as someone who belongs at one. I'm not sure which one tonight was." Claudia had no ready answer. She was a person who had built her professional life around having ready answers, and the absence of one now was unfamiliar, in a way she didn't immediately know how to manage. She said she was sorry, plain words, no embellishment. Elias nodded once. He did not perform forgiveness, and he did not withhold it as a tactic. He simply acknowledged that she had said it. "Go back inside," he said. "Loretta Kimball's team will want to talk through the revenue model before they leave. You should be part of that conversation." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she went back through the glass doors. On Monday, Westline's finance team ran a full review of the corridor revenue projections. The numbers confirmed what Elias had described. The model had not been updated following the March amendments to the Transportation Act. The actual projected shortfall in the first operating cycle came to $18.7 million, close enough to his estimate that the table at the Gala would be discussed for some time. The deal was paused, restructured. The signing was pushed back 6 weeks. Claudia called Elias on his personal number that Monday evening. She offered him a 90-day trial position on Westline's strategic operations team, working specifically on infrastructure risk assessment. He was quiet for long enough that she checked whether the call had dropped. "I'll consider it," he said, "but I want the evaluation criteria in writing before I agree to anything. Deliverables, performance standards, who decides what success looks like. And I want to be assessed on the same basis as anyone else doing this work. Not adjusted down because you feel guilty about the dinner, and not adjusted up because you're trying to make a point." "Understood," Claudia said. "I'll also need to give the hotel 2 weeks' notice," he said. "They covered me when I needed it. I'm not leaving them short." He started at Westline the following month. Spencer understood immediately what Elias's presence on the team meant, and he responded the way he responded to most things he found threatening, methodically, with a surface cordiality that made the aggression beneath it difficult to name directly. In the first 3 weeks, Elias was left off the distribution lists for 2 internal briefings. When he raised it, the omissions were corrected with an efficiency that confirmed they had not been accidental. The data sets given to him for his first 2 assignments were incomplete in ways that only became clear when he tried to run the analysis: outdated reference figures, variables missing without explanation, the kind of gaps that make the work appear sloppy if you don't catch them, and make you appear difficult if you go back and ask. He caught them every time. He went back and asked. He documented every exchange. Spencer began referring to Elias in passing as Claudia's initiative, a phrase calibrated to imply that his position was personal rather than professional, and therefore fragile in ways that a genuine hire's wouldn't be. The phrase moved through the office the way these things do, gathering implication as it traveled. Within 3 weeks, there were people at Westline who had never spoken to Elias directly, but had already formed a clear picture of what he was: temporary, a favor, a man who didn't know yet that he was in over his head. Elias absorbed all of it without reacting in any way Spencer could use against him. He was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of a response that could be characterized as emotional or disproportionate. He worked. He corrected his errors without drama. He built every finding with supporting evidence at every step, because he understood that in a room where his credibility was already being contested, his work would be examined at a different threshold than anyone else's. But he was also watching. He had always been good at watching. 22 months of being functionally invisible had made him exceptionally good at it. 3 weeks into the role, he began to notice something in Westline's procurement data that didn't fit the internal cost models he now had access to. Competitive bids that Westline should have won. Proposals that had come in just above Westline's figures, not by wide margins, but by narrow ones. The kind of narrow that comes from knowing very precisely what number to beat. He thought about the hotel logs. He had kept records during his time at the Pacific Grand. Guest requests, car movements, boardroom bookings, visitor sign-ins, useful information for the hotel, maintained the same way he had kept billable hour records during his consulting years, by default because it made the work cleaner. Spencer had used the second-floor private boardroom at the hotel 17 times in Elias's 22 months there. Most bookings were under Westline's corporate account, but 6 had been booked under a different name, a consulting firm called Parkhurst Advisory that appeared nowhere in Westline's internal records. He cross-referenced the dates. 5 of the 6 Parkhurst bookings fell within 48 hours before Westline lost a significant competitive bid. He did not say anything yet. He needed more than a pattern. He needed something that would hold up under the specific scrutiny he understood would be applied to anything he brought forward, because he was not naive about the standard of evidence required of him in that building compared to anyone else. He did not have to wait long. 3 days before Westline was scheduled to sign a $610 million federal infrastructure contract, the largest in the company's history, Claudia received a report from the IT security team. Confidential bid data had been accessed and transmitted to an external address. The account used to send it had been issued in Elias's name during his first week on the team. Spencer brought it to Claudia within 2 hours. He had the access logs. He had a recovered email. He presented it with the measured gravity of a man performing a reluctant duty. He recommended immediate termination and referral to the RCMP. Claudia called Elias into her office. She closed the door. She sat across from him with the documents on the desk and looked at him the way she looked at difficult situations her entire career, directly, without blinking, measuring. "Did you do this?" she asked. Elias looked at her for a long moment. The silence had a quality she could not fully name, not guilt, something more deliberate than that. The silence of a man deciding how much of himself to extend into a room where it might not be protected. "No," he said. He stood. He took his employee badge from his jacket pocket and set it on the desk between them. 22 months I worked at that hotel. You didn't know who I was. After the gala, after the terrace, I thought that had started to change." He looked at her steadily. "The fact that you need to ask me that question tells me I was wrong about how far we'd gotten." He walked to the door. He opened it and left without looking back. Claudia did not sleep that night. She sat in her home office with the access logs and the recovered email spread across her desk, and the city doing its indifferent nighttime work outside the window. She read through everything again, then a third time. She was looking for the detail she had missed on the first 2 passes, the thing that would resolve the specific discomfort she had been carrying since Elias placed his badge on the desk and walked out. She was good at reading evidence. It was the skill she trusted most about herself. And that skill, applied now, was telling her something was wrong. The email attributed to Elias's account was too clean, not in its content, in its structure. She had read enough internal communications, the unguarded ones people write when they're not performing, to recognize that they carry the marks of whoever wrote them. The particular rhythm, the vocabulary a person defaults to without thinking. The recovered email was grammatically precise in a way that felt assembled rather than written. The file naming convention used in the transmitted attachment was specific to a folder structure that had been in place for 8 months before Elias joined the team. There was no reason he would know it, no reason he would have used it naturally. She opened her laptop and started pulling the procurement data herself, without routing the request through the strategy team, and without telling Spencer. Elias was at the kitchen table at 11 that night, when his phone showed a missed call. He let it go. He sat for a while in the quiet of the apartment, his father asleep down the hall, the city outside the window doing its ordinary business. Then he opened the folder on his personal laptop, the one that held 22 months of Pacific Grand records, hotel bookings, visitor sign-ins, boardroom requests, Parkhurst advisory, 6 dates. He spent 3 evenings building the full evidentiary chain. The hotel visitor logs, corroborated by the official boardroom booking records he had kept as part of his standard handover notes. The dates of the Parkhurst meetings, cross-referenced against Westline's procurement losses. The pattern was clear enough, laid out in sequence, that following it required nothing beyond the willingness to look. He printed everything. He organized it into a sequence that moved from the hotel records through the procurement data, through the financial anomalies in a clear, unbroken line. He made a second copy and stored it separately. On Thursday morning, his phone showed a missed call from Claudia. The timestamp reads 6:30 a.m., the exact time he used to start his shift at the hotel. He called back. She answered on the first ring. "I need to show you something," she said. "And I think you have something to show me." "Not at the Westline office," he said. A pause. "The hotel," she said, "the terrace bar this afternoon." "I'll be there." Spencer arrived at the meeting, believing it was a formality. Claudia had told him she was convening a formal review of the data breach situation before any RCMP referral was made. She had told him she needed him there as EVP to speak to the operational context. She had told him none of the rest of it. He walked into the terrace bar at the Pacific Grand and stopped. Elias was already seated, dark suit, no tie. On the table in front of him, a manila folder and a neatly organized stack of printed documents. Beside him sat 2 people Spencer had not been told were coming, a senior partner from Westline's external legal firm, and a forensic digital analyst named Rupert Haynes, who had been quietly retained 4 days earlier. Spencer looked from Elias to Claudia. "What exactly is this?" he said. "Sit down, Spencer," Claudia said. Elias did not begin with anything personal. He opened the folder, placed the first page in the center of the table, and began walking through the timeline. He started with the hotel records, dates, boardroom bookings, visitor sign-ins under Parkhurst advisory. He set each date beside the corresponding Westline procurement outcome. The bid that came in just above Westline's figure, the process that was suspended, the contract that had subsequently gone to a competing firm on resubmission. He was precise. He did not editorialize. He moved through the documents the way he had always moved through rooms where he was being watched closely, without apology and without performance. Spencer said the Parkhurst meetings were personal consulting work, disclosed to the board. Elias placed the Westline board disclosure register on the table. The consulting relationship was not listed. Spencer said there had been an administrative oversight. Elias placed the timeline of the procurement losses beside the Parkhurst meeting dates. Administrative oversights did not typically align with 48-hour windows before competitive bid submissions across 5 separate occasions over 14 months. Rupert Haynes placed his documents alongside Elias's. The forensic review had traced the transmission of the bid data to a device registered in Westline's IT system under a different asset number than the one assigned to Elias. The login credentials for Elias's account had been accessed from that device using a remote session protocol on 3 occasions in the 2 weeks before the breach. The physical access log placed that device in the executive suite on the 14th floor, Spencer's floor, on each of those 3 occasions. Linguistic analysis of the email attributed to Elias's account showed syntactic patterns inconsistent with Elias's documented written communications, and consistent with a different author whose writing samples had been provided to Haynes's team under a general document request that had not specified its purpose. Spencer's hands were flat on the table. His face had undergone a series of small recalibrations and arrived at an expression that was no longer quite any recognizable thing. He looked at Elias. "You were a porter," he said. The words came out differently than they had at the Gala. Not contemptuous, not performative. Something else entirely, the sound of someone trying to fit an old version of events over the shape of what is in front of them and finding that it no longer can. "Yes," Elias said. He looked at Spencer with the level, unhurried steadiness of a man who has spent a long time being underestimated and has made a clear-eyed peace with what that cost him. "That's exactly why you weren't careful about what I was noticing." Spencer did not speak again. Claudia suspended him on the spot, pending the full investigation. Legal took his credentials. Security met him at the elevator. Haynes's findings were referred to outside counsel that afternoon. The RCMP referral followed within 72 hours. The federal contract, its confidentiality restored, was rescheduled for signing the following week. Claudia found Elias in the lobby on his way out. She did not have a prepared speech. She was a person who generally had prepared speeches, and the absence of one now felt, for the first time in a long time, like the only honest way to begin. "I should have known it wasn't you," she said. "Yes," Elias said. He said it without cruelty, the way you agree with something that is simply true. "I want to offer you the position again. Not a trial, a permanent role. Director of Operational Intelligence, full scope, reporting directly to me." She paused. "The offer stands regardless of how you feel about the question I asked you in my office." Elias looked at her for a moment. Through the lobby windows, Vancouver was doing its midday business. The harbor, the mountains, the flat October sky deciding whether to rain. "I don't want to be a gesture," he said. "I don't want to be the thing you did to correct what happened." "I know that," Claudia said. "Westline needs what you can do. The analysis, the way you see things that people who are too close to them stop being able to see. I'm asking because you're the right person for this role, not for any other reason." He was quiet for a moment. "I want the agreement drafted with specific evaluation criteria," he said. "Deliverables, performance standards, review timeline, reviewed by my own lawyer before I sign anything. And I want real work, not a title attached to a visible desk where I'm symbolic but not consequential." "You set the terms for what real means," Claudia said. "I'll have the agreement drafted this week." He accepted. The months that followed were not uncomplicated, because genuine work seldom is. Building an operational intelligence function inside a company that had not previously had one meant pushing into spaces where resistance was real and sometimes loud. Elias surfaced problems that were sometimes unwelcome. He disagreed with Claudia in meetings on 4 occasions in the first 2 quarters. On each of those occasions, she pushed back where she had reasons to, and revised her position where she did not. The risk monitoring framework they built together, tracking procurement anomalies and contract exposure across Westline's project portfolio in real time, reduced the company's unplanned contract losses by 28% in its first full operating cycle. The relationship between them changed the way some things change, slowly, without announcement, in the accumulation of small, ordinary moments rather than any single one. They disagreed about methodology. They agreed about outcomes. There were conversations in her office that ran past the end of the working day, not because either of them was avoiding leaving, but because the problem at hand hadn't resolved itself, and both of them preferred to finish what they had started. On a Thursday evening in October, Claudia sent him a message after a board presentation that had gone well and a dinner she had attended alone, returning home slightly restless in the way that follows a day when everything has gone correctly, and some part of you is aware that correct is not the same as full. "Dinner at the Pacific Grand this weekend? Not the Gala, just dinner, not a joke this time." Elias was at the kitchen table, reviewing a procurement risk report when the message arrived. His father was asleep down the hall. The city outside the window was doing its ordinary nighttime work, indifferent and continuous. He read the message twice. He typed back, "Saturday, 7 o'clock. I'll make the reservation." Her reply came in under a minute, "I'll drive." He typed, "I've got it." Saturday evening, he dressed carefully. Not the charcoal suit, something quieter. A dark jacket, well cut the right weight for a Vancouver October evening. He wound his father's Seiko and put it on his wrist. He checked the mirror once, not looking for confirmation of anything in particular. Just checking, the way you check before something that matters. He drove himself to the hotel. He parked 2 blocks away and walked to the main entrance. The same entrance he had passed through hundreds of times from the other direction, with a luggage trolley or a set of car keys or someone else's bag. The matron opened the door. Elias stepped through. Claudia was already at the table when he was shown in. She stood when she saw him, a small, unrehearsed gesture, the kind that means more for its lack of calculation. She looked at him the way you look at someone you have finally learned to see, which is different from the way you look at someone you have simply been looking at for a long time. They sat across from each other in a room where, months earlier, a table full of people had waited for him to confirm their assumptions. The table was different. The people were different. Most importantly, the two of them were different, not in any way that could be documented, but in the way that actually matters. They were no longer pretending that one of them wasn't fully there. They ordered, they talked. The conversation moved between work and other things and back again in the easy way it moves when two people are no longer maintaining a performance about who is allowed to say what. At some point during the evening, Claudia said, "I've been thinking about what you said on the terrace, about the difference between being invited to a table and being seen as someone who belongs at one." Elias waited. "I've been trying to understand how long I've been making that mistake," she said. "Not just with you, in general." "That's a long project," Elias said. "I know." She looked at him with the directness that was. He had come to understand her most honest register. "I thought you should know I've started it." Elias looked back at her. Outside the windows, the harbor held the city lights and the dark water below, patient and indifferent and continuous. "Good," he said, and meant it. Elias Nwosu never became someone different. He didn't need a hidden fortune or a title waiting behind a curtain. The intelligence was there on the very first morning. He walked through the service entrance and decided the work in front of him was worth doing properly. The discipline was there. The integrity was there, especially on the mornings when no one was watching, and it would have been easier to let it slip. Especially then. What changed was not Elias. What changed was that the people around him finally ran out of reasons not to see him. That's the part of this story that stays with us. It's not really about a promotion or a villain getting what he deserved, though both of those things happened. It's about what it costs a person to make themselves smaller so that everyone around them can remain comfortable, and what it looks like when they finally decide to stop. If you've ever been the one in the lobby while the decisions were made upstairs, if you've ever been the person in the room that no one thought to ask, this story was for you. We tell stories like this every week on this channel. If this one meant something to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if someone in your life needs to hear it today, share it with them. Sometimes the right story finds the right person at exactly the right moment. We'll see you next time.